Hello, welcome in everybody. Just now getting started. Okay. Just trying to make sure that my setup's all good, and then I'll get right into it. Yeah, we're good. All right, so tonight we are reading from the Brothers Grimm Fairy Tales. So y'all might know them as the darker version of the classic fairy tales that we know. So they do have some of the stories. Like I'm just gonna turn that volume down a little bit. Um, So they have some of the classic stories like Snow White and Cinderella and Rapunzel. But these were the original stories that were written, I believe it said about 200 years ago. Um, and then, of course, there are also plenty of other stories that I'm not familiar with and that you may not be either. So I picked a selection of some of them that I'm going to read through. And if there's time for any more, then I'll just keep reading more from the list. But welcome in and happy spooky month, everybody. I think we'll start with one that's going to be a bit more familiar to everyone. So we're actually going to start with Sleeping Beauty tonight. The Sleeping Beauty, Briar Rose. A long time ago, there were a king and queen who said every day, "Ah, if only we had a child," but they never had one. But it happened that once when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled before a year has gone by, and you shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true, and the queen had a little girl who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy, and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred, friends, and acquaintance, but also the wise women, in order that they might be kind and well disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendor, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on with everything in the world that one can wish for. When 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th came in. She wished to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without greeting or even looking at anyone, she cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word more, she turned around and left the room. They were all shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward, and as she could not undo the evil sentence, but only soften it, she said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years, into which the princess shall fall." The king, who wished to keep his dear child from the misfortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burned. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise women came true for the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise, that everyone saw her and was bound to love her. It happened that on the very day she turned 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and the maiden was left in the palace quite alone. So she went around in all sorts of places, looked into rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the narrow, winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there in a little room sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning her flax. "Good day, old dame," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing there?" "I'm spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. What sort of thing is that rattles round so merrily? Said the girl, and she took the spindle and wanted to spin too. But scarcely had she touched it when the magic decree was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. And in the very moment when she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there, and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come home, and had entered the great hall, began to go to sleep, and all of the court too. The horses, too, went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons upon the roof, the flies on the wall. Even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet and slept. The roast meat left off frizzling, and the cook, who was just going to pull the hair of the kitchen boy because he had forgotten something, let him go and went to sleep. And the wind fell, and on the trees outside the castle not a leaf moved again. But round about the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns, which every year became higher, and at last grew close up round the castle and all over it, so that there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof. But the story of the sleeping Briar Rose, for so the princess was named, went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge into the castle, but they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as if they had hands, and the youths were caught in them, could not get loose again, and died a miserable death. After long, long years, a king's son came again to that country, and heard an old man talking about the briar hedge, and that a castle was said to stand behind it, in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been asleep for 100 years, and that the king and the queen and the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard, too, from his grandfather, that many kings' sons had already come, and had tried to get through the thorny hedge, but they had remained sticking fast in it, and had died a pitiful death. Then the youth said, I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful briar rose. The good old man tried to dissuade him, but he did not listen to his words. But by this time the 100 years had just passed, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to awake again. When the king's son came near to the briar hedge, it was nothing but large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other of their own accord, and let him pass unhurt. Then they closed again behind him like a hedge. In the courtyard he saw the horses and the spotted hounds lying asleep. On the roof sat the pigeons with their heads under their wings. And when he entered the house, the flies were asleep on the wall, and the cook in the kitchen was still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hen which she was going to pluck. He went on farther, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and up by the throne lay the king and queen. Then he went on still farther, and all was so quiet that a breath could be heard, and at last he came to the tower, and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke, and looked at him quite sweetly. Then they went down together, and the king awoke, and the queen, and the whole court, and looked at each other in a great astonishment. And the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves. The hounds jumped up and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof pulled out their heads from under their wings, looked round, and flew into the open country. The flies on the wall crept again. The fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat. The roast began to turn and frizzle again. And the cook gave the boy such a box on the ear that he screamed, and the maid plucked the fowl ready for the spit. And then the marriage of the king's son with Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendor, and they lived contented to the end of their days. All right, I'm just going to check something with my settings here real quick. Okay, looks like everything's working as it should. So good, good. All right, let's see. I think we'll do the owl next. This is one that I'm not familiar with. Actually, most of these I've never even heard of before. Um, Hence why I bought the book. I was really interested. I wanted to read more. Now, with Sleeping Beauty, I thought that I had heard someone say that story was even like that was actually darker because that seemed like a pleasant version of the story. So I thought, um, like there was another version I think where Briar Rose didn't wake up and the prince like impregnated her, and so then she was like pregnant and gave birth while in this coma or something. That was the version I had heard about. Uh, so I don't know whose story that one is if it's not these. All right, this is a short one. This is the owl. 2 or 300 years ago, when people were far from being so crafty and cunning as they are today, an extraordinary event took place in the little town. By some mischance, one of the great owls, called horned owls, had come from the neighboring woods into the barn of one of the townsfolk in the night time, and when day broke, did not dare to venture forth again from her retreat, for fear of the other birds, which raised a terrible outcry whenever she appeared. In the morning, when the manservant went into the barn to fetch some straw, he was so mightily alarmed at the sight of the owl sitting there in a corner that he ran away and announced to his master that a monster, the like of which he had never set eyes on in his life, and which could devour a man without the slightest difficulty, was sitting in the barn, rolling its eyes about in its head. I know you already, said the master. You have courage enough to chase a blackbird about the fields, but when you see a dead hen lying, you have to go get a stick before you go near it. I must go and see for myself what kind of a monster it is, added the master, and went quite boldly into the granary and looked round him. When, however, he saw the strange grim creature with his own eyes, he was no less terrified than the servant had been. With 2 bounds he sprang out, ran to his neighbors, and begged them imploringly to lend him assistance against some unknown and dangerous beast, or else the whole town might be in danger if it were to break loose out of the barn where it was shut up. A great noise and clamor arose in all the streets. The townsmen came armed with spears, hay-forks, scythes, and axes, as if they were going out against an enemy. Finally, the senators appeared, with the burgomaster at their head. When they had drawn up in the marketplace, they marched to the barn, and surrounded it on all sides. Thereupon one of the most courageous of them stepped forth and entered with his spear lowered, but came running out immediately afterwards with a shriek, and as pale as death, and could not utter a single word. Yet 2 others ventured in, but they fared no better. At last one stepped forth, a great strong man, who was famous for his warlike deeds, and said, You will not drive away the monster by merely looking at it. We must be in earnest here. But I see that you have all turned into women, and not one of you dares to encounter the animal. He ordered them to give him some armor, had a sword and spear brought, and armed himself. All praised his courage, though many feared for his life. The 2 barn doors were opened, and they saw the owl, which in the meantime had perched herself on the middle of a great crossbeam. He had a ladder brought, and when he raised it and made ready to climb up, they all cried out to him that he was to bear himself bravely, and commended him to St. George who slew the dragon. When he had just got to the top, and the owl perceived that he had designs on her, and was also bewildered by the crowd and the shouting, and knew not how to escape, she rolled her eyes, ruffled her feathers, flapped her wings, snapped her beak, and cried, Tui Tuwu, in a harsh voice. Strike home, screamed the crowd outside to the valiant hero. Anyone who was standing where I am standing, answered he, would not cry strike home. He certainly did plant his foot one rung higher on the ladder, but then he began to tremble, and half fainting, went back again. And now there was no one left who dared to put himself in such danger. The monster, said they, has poisoned and mortally wounded the very strongest man among us by snapping at him and just breathing on him. Are we, too, to risk our lives? They took counsel as to what they ought to do to prevent the whole town being destroyed. For a long time everything seemed to be of no use, but at length the burgomaster found an expedient. My opinion, said he, is that we ought, out of the common purse, to pay for this barn, and whatsoever corn, straw, or hay it contains, and thus indemnify the owner, and then burn down the whole building, and the terrible beast with it. Thus no one will have to endanger his life. This is no time for thinking of expense, and this would be ill applied. All agreed with him. So they set fire to the barn at all four corners, and with it the owl was miserably burnt. Let anyone who will not believe it go thither and inquire for himself. Oh, that one's sad. I didn't like that at all. They just burned down the poor owl. She didn't even do anything. I'm trying to think of what it's a good metaphor for, for a creature who people are perceiving to be a threat, um, that doesn't wish any harm on anybody, but of course it's someone who's going to fight back. I mean, I think that can definitely apply to um, just unfortunately so many minorities in the U.S. right now. People who don't mean any harm, but for whatever reason, there are still people in the administration discriminating against them. Um, and it's really awful. And I don't know, they're just hating people for just existing. That's kind of what this story reminds me of. All right, I'm going to move on to another one. This is Brothers Grimm, so these tales may continue to be quite grim. Um, but I will keep reading. Let me just reopen my little chat window here, make sure I'm not missing anything from anyone else. Hmm. Okay, let's do The Wolf and the Fox next. So, one thing I noticed when I was looking through the stories in this anthology, is that there are a lot of like this animal and that animal stories, and especially a bunch of them involving a fox. I actually picked wolf and fox specifically, because there is an apothecary here in town called the Wolf and Fox Apothecary, and I've bought a couple of things from them. So I don't know. I just thought, why not? We'll do this one of all of the fox. But yeah, like here, even more. There's like the fox and his cousin, the fox and the cat. But we're doing the wolf and the fox tonight. The wolf and the fox. The wolf had the fox with him, and whatever the wolf wished, that the fox was compelled to do, for he was weaker, and he would gladly have been rid of his master. It chanced that once as they were going through the forest, the wolf said, "Red Fox, get me something to eat, or else I will eat you yourself." Then the fox answered, "I know a farmyard where there are two young lambs. If you are inclined, we will fetch one of them." That suited the wolf, and they went there, and the fox stole the little lamb, took it to the wolf, and went away. The wolf devoured it, but was not satisfied with one. He wanted the other as well, and went to get it. Since, however, he did it so awkwardly, the mother of the little lamb heard it, and began to cry out terribly, and to bleat so that the farmer came running there. They found the wolf, and beat him so mercilessly that he went to the fox limping and howling. "You have misled me finely," said he. "I wanted to fetch the other lamb, and the country folk surprised me, and have beaten me to a jelly." The fox replied, "Why are you such a glutton?" Next day they again went into the country, and the greedy wolf once more said, "Red Fox, get me something to eat, or I will eat you yourself." Then answered the fox, "I know a farmhouse where the wife is baking pancakes tonight. We will get some of them for ourselves." They went there, and the fox slipped round the house, and peeped and sniffed about until he discovered where the dish was, and then drew down 6 pancakes and carried them to the wolf. "There is something for you to eat," said he to him, and then went his way. The wolf swallowed down the pancakes in an instant, and said, "They make one want more," and went back and tore the whole dish down so that it broke in pieces. This made such a great noise that the woman came out, and when she saw the wolf, she called the people, who hurried there, and beat him as long as their sticks would hold together, till with two lame legs, and howling loudly, He got back to the fox in the forest. "How abominably you have misled me," cried he. "The peasants caught me and tanned my skin for me." But the fox replied, "Why are you such a glutton?" On the third day, when they were out together, and the wolf could only limp along painfully, he again said, "Red Fox, get me something to eat, or I will eat you yourself." The fox answered, "I know a man who has been killing, and the salted meat is lying in a barrel in the cellar. We will get that." Said the wolf, "I will go when you do, that you may help me if I am not able to get away." "I am willing," said the fox, and showed him the bypaths and ways by which at length they reached the cellar. There was meat in abundance, and the wolf attacked it instantly and thought, "There is plenty of time before I need to leave off." The fox liked it also, but looked about everywhere, and often ran to the hole by which they had come in, and tried if his body was still thin enough to slip through it. The wolf said, "Dear fox, tell me why you are running here and there so much, and jumping in and out." "I must see that no one is coming," replied the crafty fellow. "Don't eat too much." Then said the wolf, "I shall not leave until the barrel is empty." In the meantime the farmer, who had heard the noise of the fox's jumping, came into the cellar. When the fox saw him, he was out of the hole in one bound. The wolf wanted to follow him, but he had made himself so fat with eating that he could no longer get through, but stuck fast. Then came the farmer with a cudgel and struck him dead, but the fox bounded into the forest, glad to be rid of the old glutton. That one's interesting. That's like what I think of when I think of more of a classic fairy tale, something that has some kind of a moral to it. Um, you know, uh, Obviously they're just saying like don't be a glutton, and we know gluttony doesn't just apply to eating food, but gluttony is just in general like a hoarding of unnecessary resources. Um, I like that one. That one's cute. So now here's another very random one that I've picked. This is called the turnip. I have no idea what it's about. I'm very intrigued. The turnip. There were once two brothers who both served as soldiers. One of them was rich and the other poor. Then the poor one, to escape from his poverty, took off his soldier's coat and became a farmer. He dug and hoed his bit of land and sowed it with turnip seed. The seed came up, and once turnip grew there, which became large and vigorous, and visibly grew bigger and bigger, and seemed as if it would never stop growing, so that it might have been called the Princess of Turnips, for never was such a one seen before, and never will such a one be seen again. At length it was so enormous that by itself it filled a whole cart, and two oxen were required to draw it, and the farmer had not the least idea what he was to do with the turnip, or whether it would be a fortune to him or a misfortune. At last he thought, "If you sell it, what will you get for it that is of any importance? And if you eat it yourself, why, the small turnips would do you just as much good. It would be better to take it to the king, and make him a present of it." So he placed it on a cart, harnessed two oxen, took it to the palace, and presented it to the king. "What strange thing is this?" said the king. "Many wonderful things have come before my eyes, but never such a monster as this. From what seed can this have sprung? Or are you a luck child, and have met with it by chance?" "Ah, no," said the farmer. "No luck child am I. I am a poor soldier, who, because he could no longer support himself, hung his soldier's coat on a nail and took to farming land. I have a brother who is rich and well known to you, Lord King, but I, because I have nothing, am forgotten by everyone." Then the king felt compassion for him and said, "You shall be raised from your poverty, and shall have such gifts from me that you shall be equal to your rich brother." Then he bestowed on him much gold, and lands, and meadows, and herds, and made him immensely rich, so that the wealth of the other brother could not be compared with his. When the rich brother heard what the poor one had gained for himself with one single turnip, he envied him, and thought in every way how he also could get hold of a similar piece of luck. He would, however, set about it in a much wiser way, and took gold and horses and carried them to the king, and made certain the king would give him a much larger present in return. If his brother had got so much for one turnip, what would he not carry away with him in return for such beautiful things as these? The king accepted his present, and said he had nothing to give him in return that was more rare and excellent than the great turnip. So the rich man was obliged to put his brother's turnip in a cart and have it taken to his home. When there, he did not know on whom to vent his rage and anger until bad thoughts came to him, and he resolved to kill his brother. He hired murderers who were to lie in ambush. Then he went to his brother and said, "Dear brother, I know of a hidden treasure. We will dig it up together and divide it between us." The other agreed to this, and accompanied him without suspicion. While they were on their way, however, the murderers attacked him, bound him, and would have hanged him to a tree. But just as they were doing this, the loud singing and the sound of a horse's feet were heard in the distance. On this, their hearts were filled with terror, and they pushed their prisoner head first into the sack, hung it on a branch, and ran away. He, however, worked up there until he had made a hole in the sack through which he could put his head. The man who was coming by was a traveling student, a young fellow who rode on his way through the wood, joyously singing his song. When he who was aloft saw that someone was passing below him, he cried, "Good day, you have come at a lucky time." The student looked round on every side, but did not know from where the voice came. At last he said, "Who calls me?" Then an answer came from the top of the tree. "Raise your eyes, here I sit aloft in the sack of wisdom. In a short time I have learned great things. Compared with this, all schools are a jest. In a very short time I shall have learned everything, and shall descend wiser than all other men. I understand the stars, and the signs of the zodiac, and the tracks of the winds, the sand of the sea, the healing of illness, and the virtues of all herbs, birds, and stones. If you were once within it, you would feel what noble things issue forth from the sack of knowledge." The student, when he heard all this, was astonished, and said, "Blessed be the hour in which I have found you. May not I also enter the sack for a while?" He who was above replied, as if unwillingly, "For a short time I will let you get into it, if you reward me and give me good words, but you must wait an hour longer, for one thing remains which I must learn before I do it." When the student had waited a while, he became impatient, and begged to be allowed to get in at once. His thirst for knowledge was so very great. So he who was above pretended at last to give in, and said, "In order that I may come forth from the house of knowledge, you must let it down by the rope, and then you shall enter it." So the student let the sack down, untied it, and set him free, and then cried, "Now draw me up at once," and was about to get into the sack. "Halt," said the other, "that won't do," and took him by the head, and put him upside down into the sack, fastened it, and drew the disciple of wisdom up the tree by the rope. Then he swung him in the air and said, "How goes it with you, my dear fellow? Behold, already you feel wisdom coming and are gaining valuable experience. Keep perfectly quiet until you become wiser." Thereupon he mounted the student's horse and rode away, but in an hour's time said someone to let the student out again. What the heck? It was so random. Oh my God. Oh man. Yeah, that one. Oh, hi Liz. I see you there. So you're familiar with the turnip? I have never read this story before, and oh my God, I was definitely not expecting that. I was expecting a story that kind of taught some kind of lesson, but it just seems like the person just kind of got bitter in the end. So, uh, all right, let's see who's gonna be next. Let's go all the way to the beginning. Not that I actually don't know if these stories are in any particular order, like if they're in the order that they were written or anything like that. Uh, all right. So the next one we'll read is Cat and Mouse in Partnership. This one just sounds really cute. Again, this is another one of those this animal, that animal tales. There are a lot of those in this anthology. Cat and Mouse in Partnership. A certain cat had made the acquaintance of a mouse, and had said so much to her about the great love and friendship she felt for her, that at length the mouse agreed that they should live and keep house together. But we must make a provision for winter, or else we shall suffer from hunger, said the cat. And you, little mouse, cannot venture everywhere, or you will be caught in a trap some day. The good advice was followed, and a pot of fat was bought, and they did not know where to put it. At length, after much consideration, the cat said, I know no place where it will be better stored up than in the church, for no one dares take anything away from there. We will set it beneath the altar, and not touch it until we are really in need of it. So the pot was placed in safety, but it was not long before the cat had a great yearning for it, and said to the mouse, I want to tell you something, little mouse. My cousin has brought in a little son into the world, and has asked me to be godmother. He is white with brown spots, and I am to hold him over the font at the christening. Let me go out today, and you look after the house by yourself. Yes, yes, answered the mouse, by all means go. And if you get anything very good, think of me. I should like a drop of sweet red christening wine, too. All this, however, was untrue. The cat had no cousin, and had not been asked to be a godmother. She went straight to the church, stole to the pot of fat, began to lick at it, and licked the top of the fat off. Then she took a walk upon the roofs of the town, looked out for opportunities, and then stretched herself in the sun, and licked her lips whenever she thought of the pot of fat, and not until it was evening did she return home. Well, here you are again, said the mouse. No doubt you have had a merry day. All went off well, answered the cat. What name did they give the child? Top off, said the cat quite coolly. Top off, cried the mouse. That is a very odd and uncommon name. Is it a usual one in your family? What does it matter? Said the cat. It is no worse than Crumb Stealer, as your godchildren are called. Before long the cat was seized by another fit of longing. She said to the mouse, You must do me a favor, and once more manage the house for a day alone. I am again asked to be godmother, and as the child has a white ring round its neck, I cannot refuse. The good mouse consented, but the cat crept behind the town walls to the church, and devoured half the pot of fat. Nothing ever seems so good as what one keeps to oneself, said she, and was quite satisfied with her day's work. When she went home, the mouse inquired, And what was this child christened? Half done, answered the cat. Half done? What are you saying? I have never heard the name in my life. I'll wager anything it is not in the calendar of saints. The cat's mouth soon began to water for some more licking. All good things go in threes, said she. I am asked to stand godmother again. The child is quite black, only it has white paws, but with that exception it has not a single white hair on its whole body. This only happens once every few years. You will let me go, won't you? Top off, half done, answered the mouse. They are such odd names, they make me very thoughtful. You sit at home, said the cat, in your dark gray fur coat and long tail, and are filled with fancies. That's because you do not go out in the daytime. During the cat's absence, the mouse cleaned the house and put it in order, but the greedy cat entirely emptied the pot of fat. When everything is eaten up, one has some peace, she said to herself. And well filled and fat, she did not return home till night. The mouse at once asked what name had been given to the third child. It will not please you more than the others, said the cat. He is called All Gone. All Gone, cried the mouse. That is the most suspicious name of all. I have never seen it in print. All gone, what can that mean? And she shook her head, curled herself up, and lay down to sleep. From this time forth, no one invited the cat to be godmother, but when the winter had come, there was no longer anything to be found outside. The mouse thought of their provision and said, Come, cat, we will go to our pot of fat which we have stored up for ourselves. We shall enjoy that. Yes, answered the cat. You will enjoy it as much as you would enjoy sticking that dainty tongue of yours out the window. They set out on their way, but when they arrived, the pot of fat certainly was still in its place, but it was empty. Alas, said the mouse, Now I see what has happened. Now it comes to light. You are a true friend. You have devoured all when you were standing godmother. First top off, then half done, then will you hold your tongue? Cried the cat. One more word, and I will eat you too. All gone was already on the poor mouse's lips. Scarcely had she spoken it before the cat sprang on her, seized her, and swallowed her down. And that is the way of the world. Oh my god, these crack me up. Oh man. Oh, let's see. So what else do I have on my list? Probably go to the crystal ball next. Feel like that'd be nice for the spooky little ambiance we have right now. So let's see. It's 6:30. Crystal ball. There was once an enchantress who had three sons who loved each other as brothers, but the old woman did not trust them and thought they wanted to steal her power from her. So she changed the eldest into an eagle, which was forced to dwell in the Rocky Mountains, and was often seen sweeping in great circles in the sky. The second she changed into a whale, which lived in the deep sea, and all that was seen of it was that it sometimes spouted up a great jet of water in the air. Each of them bore his human form for only 2 hours daily. The third son, who was afraid she might change him into a raging wild beast, a bear perhaps, or a wolf, went secretly away. He had heard that a king's daughter who was bewitched was imprisoned in the castle of the Golden Sun, and was waiting for deliverance. Those, however, who tried to free her risked their lives. 23 youths had already died a miserable death, and now only one other might make the attempt, after which no more must come. And as his heart was without fear, he had the idea of seeking out the castle of the Golden Sun. He had already traveled about for a long time without being able to find it, when he came by chance to a great forest, and did not know the way out of it. All at once he saw in the distance two giants, who made a sign to him with their hands. And when he came to them, they said, "We are quarreling about a cat, and which of us it is to belong to, and we are equally strong. Neither of us can get the better of the other. The small men are cleverer than we are, so we will leave the decision to you." "How can you dispute about an old cap?" said the youth. "You do not know what properties it has. It is a wishing cap. Whoever puts it on can wish himself away wherever he likes. In an instant he will be there." "Give me the cap," said the youth. "I will go a short distance off, and when I call you, you must run a race, and the cap shall belong to the one who gets first to me." He put it on and went away, and thought of the king's daughter, forgot the giants, and walked continually onward. At length he signaled from the very bottom of his heart, and cried, "Ah, if I were but at the castle of the Golden Sun!" And hardly had the words passed his lips, that he was standing on a high mountain before the gate of the castle. He entered and went through all the rooms, until in the last he found the king's daughter. But how shocked was he when he saw her! She had an ashen gray face full of wrinkles, bleary eyes, and red hair. "Are you the king's daughter, whose beauty the whole world praises?" cried he. "Ah," she answered, "this is not my form. Human eyes can only see me in this state of ugliness. But that you may know what I am like, look in the mirror. It does not let itself be misled. It will show you my image as it is in truth." She gave him the mirror in his hand, and he saw in it the likeness of the most beautiful maiden on earth, and saw, too, how the tears were rolling down her cheeks with grief. Then said he, "How can you be set free? I fear no danger." She said, "He who gets the crystal ball and holds it before the enchanter will destroy his power with it, and I shall resume my true shape. Ah," she added, So many have already gone to meet death for this, and you are so young, I grieve that you should encounter such great danger. Nothing can keep me from doing it, said he, but tell me what I must do. You shall know everything, said the king's daughter. When you descend the mountain on which the castle stands, a wild bull will stand below by a spring, and you must fight with it. And if you have the luck to kill it, a fiery bird will spring out of it, which bears in his body a burning egg, and in the egg the crystal ball lies like a yolk. The bird will not, however, let the egg fall until forced to do so, and if it falls on the ground, it will flame up and burn everything that is near, and melt even ice itself, and with it the crystal ball. Then all your trouble will have been in vain. The youth went down to the spring, where the bull snorted and bellowed at him. After a long struggle, he plunged his sword in the animal's body, and it fell down. Instantly, a fiery bird arose from it, and was about to fly away. But the young man's brother, the eagle, who was passing between the clouds, swooped down, hunted it away to the sea, and struck it with his beak until, in its extremity, it let the egg fall. The egg did not, however, fall into the sea, but on a fisherman's hut which stood on the shore, and the hut began at once to smoke and was about to break out in flames. Then arose in the sea waves as high as a house. They streamed over the hut and subdued the fire. The older brother, the whale, had come swimming to them, and had driven the water up on high. When the fire was extinguished, the youth sought for the egg and happily found it. It was not yet melted, but the shell was broken by being so suddenly cooled with the water, and he could take out the crystal ball unhurt. When the youth went to the enchanter and held it before him, the latter said, My power is destroyed, and from this time forth you are the king of the castle of the golden sun. With this you can likewise give back to your brothers their human form. Then the youth hastened to the king's daughter, and when he entered the room, she was standing there in the full splendor of her beauty, and joyfully they exchanged rings with each other. That's another very random one. Oh my god. Alrighty. Having a little trouble with my eyelashes here. Alright, let's see. Okay, yeah, we still have some time. So, we'll do the queen bee next. The queen bee. Two kings' sons once went out in search of adventures and fell into a wild, disorderly way of living, so that they never came home again. The youngest, who was called Simpleton, set out to seek his brothers, but when at length he found them, they mocked him for thinking that he could not get through the world of his simplicity, when they both could not make their way, and yet were so much cleverer. They all three traveled away together, and came to an ant hill. The two eldest wanted to destroy it, to see the little ants creeping about in their terror, and carrying their eggs away, but Simpleton said, Leave the creatures in peace. I will not allow you to disturb them. Then they went onwards, and came to a lake, on which a great number of ducks were swimming. The two brothers wanted to catch a couple and roast them, but Simpleton would not permit it, and said, Leave the creatures in peace. I will not allow you to kill them. At length they came to a bee's nest, in which there was so much honey that it ran out of the trunk of the tree where it was. The two wanted to make a fire beneath the tree and suffocate the bees in order to take away the honey, but Simpleton again stopped them and said, Leave the creatures in peace. I will not allow you to burn them. At length three brothers arrived at a castle where stone horses were standing in the stables, and no human being was to be seen. And they went through all the halls until, quite at the end, they came to a door in which there were three locks. In the middle of the door, however, there was a little pane through which they could see into the room. There they saw a little gray man who was sitting at a table. They called him once, twice, but he did not hear. At last they called him for the third time, when he got up, opened the locks, and came out. He said nothing, however, but conducted them to a handsomely spread table, and when they had eaten and drunk, he took each of them to a bedroom. Next morning the little gray man came to the eldest, beckoned to him, and conducted him to a stone table on which there were inscribed three tasks that when performed could deliver the castle from enchantment. The first was that in the forest, beneath the moss, lay the princess's pearls, 1,000 in number, which must be picked up, and if by sunset one single pearl was wanting, he who had looked for them would be turned into stone. The eldest went there and sought the whole day, but when it came to an end, he had only found 100, and what was written on the table came to pass, and he was changed into stone. Next day, the second brother undertook the adventure. It did not, however, fare much better with him than with the eldest. He did not find more than 200 pearls, and was changed to stone. At last the turn came to Simpleton also, who sought in the moss. It was, however, so hard to find the pearls, and he got on so slowly that he seated himself on a stone and wept. And while he was thus sitting, the king of the ants, whose life he had once saved, came with 5,000 ants, and before long the little creatures had got all the pearls together and laid them in a heap. The second task, however, was to fetch out of the lake the key of the king's daughter's bedchamber. When Simpleton came to the lake, the ducks which he had saved swam up to him, dived down, and brought the key out of the water. But the third task was the most difficult. From amongst the three sleeping daughters of the king, he was to choose the youngest and dearest. They, however, resembled each other exactly, and were only to be distinguished by their having eaten different sweetmeats before they fell asleep. The eldest a bit of sugar, the second a little syrup, and the youngest a spoonful of honey. Then the queen of the bees, which Simpleton had protected from the fire, came and tasted the lips of all three, and at last she remained sitting on the mouth which had eaten honey, and thus the king's son recognized the right princess. Then the enchantment was at an end, everything was released from sleep, and those who had been turned to stone received once more their natural forms. Simpleton married the youngest and sweetest princess, and after her father's death became king, and his two brothers received the two other sisters. Alright, that's interesting. Oh man, this one eyelash just does not wanna stay in place. It's driving me crazy. Alright, so those were all of the ones that I had starred, but I still have more written down. I might be able to get through two more. So let's go to the Seven Ravens. The Seven Ravens. There was once a man who had seven sons, and still he had no daughter, however much he wished for one. At length his wife again gave him hope of a child, and when it came into the world it was a girl. The joy was great, but the child was sickly and small, and had to be privately baptized on account of its weakness. The father sent one of the boys in haste to the spring to fetch water for the baptism. The other six went with him, and as each of them wanted to be the first to fill it, the jug fell into the well. There they stood and did not know what to do, and none of them dared to go home. As they still did not return, the father grew impatient and said, "They have certainly forgotten it for some game, the wicked boys." He became afraid that the girl would have to die without being baptized, and in his anger cried, "I wish the boys were all turned into ravens." Hardly was the word spoken before he heard a whirring of wings over his head in the air, looked up and saw seven coal-black ravens flying away. The parents could not recall the curse, and however sad they were at the loss of their seven sons, they still to some extent comforted themselves with their dear little daughter, who soon grew strong and every day became more beautiful. For a long time, she did not know that she had brothers, for her parents were careful not to mention them before her. But one day she accidentally heard some people saying of herself, the girl was certainly beautiful, but that in reality she was to blame for the misfortune which had befallen her seven brothers. Then she was much troubled, and went to her father and mother and asked if it was true that she had brothers, and what had become of them. The parents now dared to keep the secret no longer, but said that what had befallen her brothers was the will of heaven, and that her birth was not to blame. But the maiden took it to her heart daily, and thought she must save her brothers. She had no rest or peace until she set out secretly, and went forth into the wide world to find her brothers and set them free, let it cost what it might. She took nothing with her but a little ring belonging to her parents as a keepsake, a loaf of bread against hunger, a little pitcher of water against thirst, and a little chair as a provision against weariness. And now she went continually onwards, far, far, to the very end of the world. Then she came to the sun, but it was too hot and terrible, and devoured little children. Hastily she ran away, and ran to the moon, but it was far too cold, and also awful and malicious. And when it saw the child, it said, I smell the flesh of men. At this she swiftly ran away, and came to the stars, which were kind and good to her, and each of them sat on its own particular little chair. But the morning star arose, and gave her the drumstick of a chicken, and said, if you have not that drumstick, you cannot open the glass mountain, and in the glass mountain are your brothers. The maiden took the drumstick, wrapped it carefully in a cloth, and went onwards again until she came to the glass mountain. The door was shut, and she thought she would take out the drumstick, but when she undid the cloth it was empty, and she had lost the good star's present. What was she now to do? She wished to rescue her brothers, and had no keys of Glass Mountain. The good sister took a knife, cut off one of her little fingers, put it in the door, and succeeded in opening it. When she had gone inside, a little dwarf came to meet her, who said, my child, what are you looking for? I am looking for my brothers, the seven ravens, she replied. The dwarf said, the Lord Ravens are not at home, but if you will wait here until they come, step in. Thereupon the little dwarf carried the raven's dinner in, on seven little plates, and in seven little glasses, and the little sister ate a morsel from each plate, and from each little glass she took a sip, but in the last little glass she dropped the ring which she had brought away with her. Suddenly she heard a whirring of wings and a rushing through the air, and then the little dwarf said, now the Lord Ravens are flying home. Then they came and wanted to eat and drink, and looked for their little plates and glasses. Then said one after the other, who has eaten something from my plate? Who has drunk out of my little glass? It was a human mouth. And when the seventh came to the bottom of the glass, the ring rolled against his mouth. Then he looked at it, and saw that it was a ring belonging to his father and mother, and said, God grant that our sister may be here, and then we shall be free. When the maiden, who was standing behind the door watching, heard that wish, she came forth, and at this all the ravens were restored to their human form again, and they embraced and kissed each other and went joyfully home. Cute, cute, cute. All right, so I have enough time to read one more very short one. So we will just read the first one that's in the book. Oh, wait, no, this one's longer than I thought. Hmm, let me see. I'll see if I can find a really short one. All right, here's a really short one to end with for the night. The straw, the coal, and the bean. In a village dwelt a poor old woman who had gathered together a dish of beans and wanted to cook them. So she made a fire on her hearth, and so that it might burn quicker, she lighted it with a handful of straw. When she was emptying the beans into the pan, one dropped without her observing it. and lay on the ground beside a straw, and soon afterwards a burning coal from the fire leapt down to the two. Then the straw began and said, "Dear friends, from where do you come here?" The coal replied, "I fortunately sprang out of the fire, and if I had not escaped by main force, my death would have been certain. I should have been burnt to ashes." The bean said, "I too have escaped with a whole skin, but if the old woman had got me into the pan, I should have been made into a broth without any mercy, like my comrades." "And would a better fate have befallen my lot?" said the straw. "The old woman has destroyed all my brethren in fire and smoke. She seized 60 of them at once and took their lives. I luckily slipped through her fingers." "But what are we to do now?" said the coal. "I think," answered the bean, "that as we have so fortunately escaped death, we should keep together like good companions, and lest a new misfortune should overtake us here, we should go away together to a foreign country." The proposition pleased the two others, and they set out on their way in company. Soon, however, they came to a little brook, and as there was no bridge or foot plank, they did not know how they were to get over it. The straw hit on a good idea, and said, "I will lay myself straight across, then you can walk over on me as a bridge." The straw therefore stretched itself from one bank to the other, and the coal, who was of an impetuous disposition, tripped quite boldly onto the newly built bridge. But when she had reached the middle, and heard the water rushing beneath her, she was, after all, afraid, and stood still, and ventured no farther. The straw, however, began to burn, broke in two pieces, and fell into the stream. The coal slipped after her, hissed when she got into the water, and breathed her last. The bean, who had prudently stayed behind on the shore, could not but laugh at the event, and was unable to stop, and laughed so heartily that she burst. It would have been all over for her, likewise, if, by good fortune, a tailor who was travelling in search of work had not sat down to rest by the brook. As he had a compassionate heart, he pulled out his needle and thread, and sewed her together. The bean thanked him most prettily, but as the tailor used black thread, all beans then, since then, have a black seam. Oh my god, that one was ridiculous. Very, very cute. But what kind of bean are they talking about? Because, like, they say all beans have a black seam, but, like, cannellini beans don't. So I'm very confused. Oh, well. There is another story that's in my, like, animal stories anthology that is kind of this style of story where it's like silly explanations for like why certain things turned out the way that they did. And so, this one being like an explanation of like why beans have black seams. Um, but yeah, the other one that I'm thinking of is the cat who walks by himself. And that one just kind of explains like why people have particular relationships and uses for their animals. But that is all for this evening, and I have got to go and get some dinner. So I'm starving. But I hope everyone who tuned in enjoyed some of the stories that we went through. We made it through quite a few. Like, this is a much faster read, I'm finding, than reading Edgar Allan Poe. I feel like when I'm reading Poe's poems, and it's, I don't know if it's because they're longer or because, like, I'm having to read them with a certain cadence. Um, but it feels like I don't get through as many of those in a live stream. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it. And then I'm trying to see if there's anything else. So, all right, guys. Well, I'm closing out for the night. Everyone have a good evening and be sure to tune in next Thursday for our next stream, which is going to be a cute cooking theme. So that'll be a fun one. I will be announcing soon which exact theme that's going to be. I just have to confirm one last detail with a friend of mine um, who is going to be joining me for one of my streams this month. So yeah, bye bye.